Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. I'm Task Force Bourbon. Tonight we're going to be reviewing the new Jack Daniel's Bonded release. As you can see, we're going to be doing a blind flight fight against its brother in kind, the Bottled in Bond offering. Now, you should noticeably see there's already a difference in the sense that you have a 700 milliliter offering, and this is, of course, a 1 liter offering, which again is quite unnormal from regular whiskey or bourbon bottlings in the sense that they're generally bottled at 750 milliliters. So if you like this one more, you're winning. If this one, then maybe not so much. But before we dive into the tasting events for the evening, what we're going to do first is just do a quick recap on what Bottled in Bond is, and then we're going to go and talk about Jack Daniel's, history as it pertains to Bottled in Bond, just briefly, before getting into each one of these bottles and expressions, as Jack Daniel's calls them. So, as promised, right up front, essentially, Bottled in Bond is, came back before the days of carefully crafted whiskey and bourbon as we know it. Consumers couldn't always be sure what they were pouring into their bourbon bottles. Then came the Bottled in Bond Act in 1897. The U.S. government passed this law with support from distillers and drinkers alike to ensure consistency and quality. All right, so basically, people were adulterating their, spirits, rectifiers, and whatnot to, sell otherwise poor and potentially hazardous distillate. Bottled in Bond is a label now for an American-made distilled beverage that has been aged and bottled according to a set of legal regulations containing the United States government standards of identity for distilled spirits, as originally laid out in the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897, of course. As a reaction to widespread adulteration of American whiskey, the act made the federal government the guarantor of a spirit's authenticity. It gave producers a tax incentive for participating and helped ensure proper accounting in the eventual collection of the tax that was due. This combination of advantages led to a group of whiskey distillers led by the one and only Colonel Edmund Haynes Taylor, Jr., creator of Old Taylor Bourbon. Yes, that same E.H. Taylor you know and love from Buffalo Trace, to join with then Secretary of the Treasury John G. Carlisle to fight for the Bottled in Bond Act. To be labeled as Bottled in Bond or bonded, the liquor must be the product of one distillation season, either January to June or July to December, at one distillery by one distiller, aged in a federally bonded warehouse under government supervision for at least 4 years, bottled at 100 proof, or that is 50% alcohol by volume, labeled with both the identity and location of the distillery, and if different, where it was bottled, and of course, as always, produced in the USA, because Bottled in Bond does not always apply to just bourbon, because to be bourbon, one of those rules is it has to be made in America, but for whiskeys, that's not always the case, right? To be Bottled in Bond whiskey, you would, of course, have to be made and produced in the United States of America. So for over 150 years since its founding in 1866, Jack Daniel's made a single recipe, Tennessee whiskey. All right, that is essentially what otherwise could be categorized as bourbon if it were not for really one of two things. One, that they charcoal mellow theirs, which does not make it not bourbon, and the fact that they age it in Tennessee. Those two factors basically led to a series of events that led to the creation of a labeling called Tennessee whiskey. All right, so you got to be careful when you drink Tennessee whiskey in the sense that it could be not a bourbon and you would never know otherwise because it's never going to be labeled bourbon. They're very prideful of that label, Tennessee whiskey. So most bourbons, despite those two other aspects, would not be labeled bourbon. But that's a story for another day. We're here to talk about these two guys, so back to it. So since 1956, they've been owned by Brown-Forman Corporation. So that's the same Brown-Forman that produces Old Forester, Woodford Reserve. And why is that important, right? Because when we talk about the Bottled in Bond Act and all those things that had to have, you'll note here on the older, what I'll call old for now, Bottled in Bond offering, you'll see, I believe it's on this side. Yep, down here. I'll make sure I get that in picture. I can't really tell, but it should say right at the bottom, DSP-TENN-1 or TAC for us military folks, meaning that this is the first distillery in the state of Tennessee. Excuse me, I had a momentary lapse there. But when we move over to the bonded one, we look at this one, and this is a little bit harder to see. Make sure it doesn't spill all over the camera, but there's two, DSP 1 and 4 right there. So you probably can't see those very well. Move it in and out. Hopefully at some point you'll get it. Otherwise, you're just going to have to trust me, right? But it says DSP TN-1 and DSP TN-4. Now, I did a little bit of research with the TTB and pulled their records, and really all that I could find in the sense of exactly what those were, right, is -1 refers to, quote, Jack Daniel Distillery, Lem Motlow, Prop Incorporated, Lynchburg, that is Tennessee. And they have the authority by that labeling to be a distiller, beverage, grain, and then bottler dash beverage. Whereas the -4 is Brown-Forman Corporation, Lynchburg. Again, that is Tennessee, where they have the authority by that labeling to be a bottler slash beverage. So I could not find anybody to confirm this, but my speculation based on those facts and the fact that Bottle and Bond has to label if different where it was bottled would be that while these are still two Jack Daniels owned distillery DSPs, as it were, one being owned by the Brown-Forman Corporation and one by Jack Daniels proper, the one in this case, that they probably bottled it under the Brown-Forman Corporation or the Brown-Forman bottling plant, or there's probably some level of discrepancy there that they have to label it as such. Otherwise, they probably would have went with this -1. I mean, wouldn't you? That's definitely cooler than, not one. One's always cooler. So moving back, to the timeline is really we see, like I said, they haven't done much away from their standard mash bill for the 150 years over that they've been in existence. However, you fast forward to 2017, the distillery releases its first rye. Can you believe that? It took that long to officially get a rye out. And then in 2018, we see this guy come to market, the Bottled and Bond. Now, this is why I'm going to pause here and talk a little bit about it, right? So this was officially released as Jack Daniel's Bottled and Bond in August 2018. It was largely sold as a global travel retail offering. Later, the TTB did approve labeling for a bonded expression. Now, that's not unclear for me. That's information I'm not privy to, but I'm assuming that's where they get the labeling for this. Or, maybe they could have labeled this differently. But this is on the label, says Bottled and Bond, and this says bonded. They mean the same thing legally, but for marketing purposes, there is a difference, right? And according to them, there is a difference in these products and their flavor profiles as well. So we got a quote here from the former master distiller, Jeff Arnett, 7th master distiller, if memory serves, whereas they're now on the number 8, Chris Fletcher. But Jeff Arnett says, quote, whiskey making in the 1800s too often produced a hodgepodge of subpar, counterfeit, and even dangerous spirits. To bring a high level of safety and consistency to American whiskeys, Congress passed the Bottle and Bond Act, which certifies the quality of whiskey carrying that designation. It had to be at least aged 4 years and bottled 100 proof at one distillery during a single season. The Bottle and Bond Act was passed in 1897. Mr. Jack began putting his Tennessee whiskey in the now familiar square bottles over 2 years earlier in 1895. This new offering replicated those rules that was set more than 120 years ago. So I have heard that. I've heard that from the distillery that the square bottles was a way for them to sort of ensure there was some level of quality and consistency control for at least the brand image at the very least, but really for the consumer's welfare to ensure that they're getting Jack and they can trust Jack as a quality product. But I've also heard, and maybe it's a little twofold, but they designed it as such so that they could fit better on the shelf together, meaning they could get more product on the shelf and sell more. So again, we have another quote here from Marshall Farrer, Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Brown-Forman Global Travel Retail, who says, in many ways, the introduction of Jack Daniel Bottled and Bond is a step back into the early days of the distillery. We think so much of this whiskey that we are making it a permanent expression of the Jack Daniel family of brands. Okay. So while old number 7, you should be familiar with that if you're watching and tuning into a Jack Daniel's bourbon review. I'm hoping that you know what Jack Daniel's is. It's the most widely sold whiskey in the world, American whiskey in the world. So it's insane, right? But it carries no age statement. That number 7 does not stand for 7 years. The distillery says what's inside is generally 4 to 5 years old, though some younger stock could be included in that. The bottle and bond rules require that the whiskey in the mix must be at least 4 years old. So while the overall composition of this expression is a bit different from the standard, the general approach to the spirit, charcoal mellowing, relatively young stock, mash bill of, and they share the same one here, 80% corn, 12% malted barley, and 8% rye, is about the same, with the notable exception that this expression is 20 proof points higher. So to recap, this is, again, what I've heard, and this is kind of what this is saying here. This is Jack Daniel's old number 7, your standard issue stuff, just 20 proof points higher, and it follows the other bottle and bond rules, right? So I thought it was better tasting than your regular Jack, but you know, when something's maybe a little more carefully selected, that's what you get. And so that brings us to this. So now in 2022, they announced their first super premium line extension in 25 years with the introduction of Jack Daniel's Bonded Tennessee Whiskey. And there's another one, Jack Daniel's Triple Mash Blended Straight Whiskey, which is just a whiskey. It's got rye in it. It's got, 100% malted barley, amongst some of their other regular standard Jack Daniels too. So I'm not reviewing that because it's not, close enough to be considered a bourbon for a channel called Task Force Bourbon. The Bonded series, which would be this and the other one, honors the distillery's whiskey-making excellence and will be a permanent extension of Jack Daniel's family of brands. So no FOMO, guys. No fear of missing out. This one and the other that's not on the table are permanent line expressions. So don't go paying secondary prices for them. They will be sold globally for everyone somewhere around the $30 market, right? That's obviously subject to change based on a number of different factors, but what that should tell you, it's a generally accessible product. Okay, so as is required, sorry, let me skip forward here. So we have a quote here from Chris Fletcher now about this bonded expression. Quote, the Jack Daniel's Distillery has been making exceptional American whiskey to the highest standards for generations, before and after the Bottle and Bond Act, dating back to the days of Mr. Jack himself. Jack Daniel's Bonded and Triple Mash are a nod to our heritage with a touch of innovation and craftsmanship. These whiskeys are another opportunity to both our friends and new drinkers to explore and discover everything Jack Daniel's has to offer. So they go to say that barrels are hand-selected for the characteristics of deeper color, flavor, and aroma, which deliver a darker, richer, and more oak-forward character. It's a big, bold Tennessee whiskey flavor at 100 proof, and tasting notes, which I won't read because I don't want to spoil it for you and myself. But what did we get out of that quote? Basically, what that says here is these are the same, except for these barrels are hand-selected by the master distiller, right? So what I'm seeing here in all the research that I get is that this is Jack Daniel's Bottled and Bond, master distiller select-ish, right? Because this is a small batch product, not labeled as such, but it uses somewhere from what I've heard about 200 barrels. To me, that's not what I think of when I think of small batch. That's a relative term. There's no legal definition to that term. It's relative to the size of the distillery. But 200 barrels is not by no means a small number of barrels. You look at some of the other small craft distilleries, you look at 5 to 10 to 20 barrels can be a small batch. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because 200 barrel mix could suggest a level of consistency for this brand, as we go down the years. Because, I saw a cool quote here before I began on the side of this barrel, or one of the others. Nope, right here. And it's kind of neat because it's simple, but it's true. Every barrel is different. Every bottle tastes the same. So excellent point of why blending into something like a small or large batch is a smart thing to do on some level. So I think I already talked about that a little bit. And again, they use the same mash bill. But these bottles themselves, I thought I had a little bit of background there for this, but let me see where it's at. Okay, well, I can't seem to find it, but essentially these bottles pay homage back to how they used to bottle their bourbon back in the Lem Motlow days. So think way back in the early conceptions or of the distillery. And what you see here is really cool raised lettering, right? That says Jack Daniel Distillery, DSP-TN-1 Tennessee. And then on the back, it's got another really cool labeling. Of course, it's going to be backwards for you all, but it shouldn't be that difficult to determine. Essentially, it says established 1866 and registered. And again, the same thing on the front, Jack Daniel Distillery, DSP-TN-1 Tennessee. Really cool size of the bottle. It's 700 milliliters. They're both obviously all square, but these have that sort of rounded type edge to it versus a very square 90-degree kind of thing going on this expression. All right, so enough of that. Into the whole reason why you guys are probably here. We're going to be doing a blind flight fight against these two offerings. I have no idea what's under these cards or what's in these glasses. I'm going to start left to right because I think that makes the most sense. And I'm going to go ahead and try to see if I can't figure out which is best. I'm going to probably go back and forth 3 times and stick with me. I normally would put these side by side and, compare and contrast color. But both being probably around 4 to 5 years of age, both being obviously 100 proof. So Bottom Bond, it's kind of weird in the sense like it has to be at least 4 years. But you can obviously be much, much older than that. I've got a Wild Turkey Master's Keep that's 17-year-old Bottom Bond. I've got an Old Fitzgerald 16-year Bottom Bond, just as examples. But they always, always, always have to be exactly 100 proof or 50% ABV. So all that to say, these are probably going to share a lot of same colors. Glass 1. A very soft, mellow sweetness. Glass 2, soft, mellow sweetness. Although glass 1 smells, I don't know if this makes sense, maybe smells a little older. Like maybe there's a touch more oak in it. Maybe that's that hand-selected piece. Maybe this is going to be the bonded. I don't know. Well, but that's what I'm getting on those. All right, in for the kill. Wow, this attacks your mouth. It's an explosion of flavor. It goes normally what you could get with bourbons. Some would say just an experiment you can do is just touch your tongue and let that see where it crawls along your tongue. And if you've seen a picture of a tongue where it shows you different flavor sectors, you can see where you might get sort of some flavor notes from. This goes all over the place. It's just bouncing. Some vanillas, big surprise. Some oaks, again, big surprise. But there's some baking spices there that really take over that vanilla pretty quickly. Maybe some rye. I don't know. It's 8%. You wouldn't think so, but we'll see. Let's try one more again. Okay, from the mid, it starts to get a bit more creamy. And there's some fruit in the back, just giving it a general kind of sweetness. Not a sugary kind of sweetness, but just like a sweetness that you get from like a peach or a cherry. But this one doesn't have cherry notes. I'm just saying like that kind of general sweetness from like I guess what would be fructose. All right, and then move on to glass 2 real quick. Let me do a quick rinse. Okay. This one's more balanced. This one's just like an explosion of vanillas and baking spices, right? Damn. This has got some green apples kind of going on there. Very dry. Yeah, less creamy than the first one. So, man, shoot. They're kind of equal right now. This is going to be probably very difficult because it's essentially almost comparing which tastes better, this bourbon or the exact same bourbon. But again, I want to make sure if you're watching, what we leave away with is, how close these are or are not. But really, is it worth, seeking if, because when you get this one, it's like I said, it's global offering that's going to be readily available. This, not so much. This is, like I said, it's sold at the travel retail. So you look at places like the airport, for example, duty-free stores, military exchanges get them quite a bit. That's actually where I got this. That one's a little bit more difficult to seek out. And so the takeaway here should be, or could be, is it worth the hunt? This one, I don't know, it seems like it's mellowing out now, but it's just like, it's almost like, I would almost use the word spicy. It's got some green tannic stuff on the end. Tastes younger than the glass 2. I mean, they both got like a lot of the same notes. These are almost the same bourbon, but this one's got a couple things I don't like going on it, like the tannic stuff. There's a bit of youth there. There's some tannicness on this one too. They just taste a bit on the younger side. I like barrel strength, cask strength, right? Barrel proof, whatever you want to call it. Older bourbons, starting at 12, ranging to 25. So that's where my palate is. So if you're, like Jack Daniels, you probably like their 80. If you like their Jack Daniels Old Number 7, which is an 80 proof offering, unless you get their Legacy, which they used to bottle at 86 proof. 80 proof is the bare minimum to be considered bourbon. Again, of course, we have to say this is a Tennessee whiskey, not officially bourbon, but they still follow those rules, meaning that 80 proof is about as low as you're going to go, or it's probably as low as you ever want to go for any kind of brown spirit, really, especially whiskeys. All that to say, though, that these both taste much different than Old Number 7. They taste different than Gentleman Jack in very good ways. I'm very much so not a fan of Gentleman Jack. It's very low proof for me. But on top of that, with the double charcoal mellowing, I think that just strips too much of all those good flavor, conifers and esters, all those good things that, I like about bourbons. But again, that's to each his own, and some really prefer that, style of whiskey, Tennessee whiskey, and, power to you. But these two are going to be much different than those for sure, and a far cry from their single barrel stuff. All right. One more time. Let's start with glass 2, I guess, this time. That my palate's had a second to kind of dry out. They both have a lot of corn on them. A little bit of pastry. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what all I'm getting on this one. Not overpowering. This one might have a splash of cocoa on it, on glass 1. Damn it! Sorry for cursing, but I'm kind of frustrated because I think I would have had a decision by now, and I apologize for having you guys maybe watch longer than you wanted to do, but this is a tough one. I think I like the depth here on glass one, even though I've complained about it a few times now. But it's got more depth, maybe with that dusting of cocoa in there. The baking spices are abounding for sure, but this one maybe is just a bit too simple. It's a little sweeter. Well, I'm going to call it. I think I'm going to go with glass one over glass two, but what I will say is that really they're tied. They truly are. If you want to buy one, buy one. You don't need to buy both. They're really the same. But glass one is the old stuff. Glass two is the new stuff. So there you have it. I don't really feel like that was excellent in the terms of comparisons, in the sense that they're just too similar. Now that I'm getting the glass two, this one has more of just a balance. But let me see glass one. Okay, I think I know why I like glass one better. I'll summarize it like this: glass one or glass two would otherwise probably be a better glass. It's got a little bit more balance, like I've been talking about, but where glass one lacks that balance a little bit, what it makes up for is screaming in flavors, because these are both kind of in the 3.0 rating out of a 5.0 rating scale. That's still a good bourbon, but if you think about it, 2.5 is the middle of the road, right? So 3.0 is really the first rating that goes above being it's okay to it's good technically speaking. I'm not a gigantic fan of either one of these, but I think the Bottle and Bond, the older travel retail offering here is probably a touch over, just because, again, if I was looking for a premium offering, if this was actually if it was like a 4.0, 4.5, and this was a 4.0, 4.5, and you're talking about 0.5 difference or something like that, I would start to be like, okay, that balance means something here. But if there's not enough going on in terms of flavors and things like that I just like, are really exciting me, then it doesn't matter. What I'm looking for is like anything really to like separate you from just being a marginal offering. And I think the travel retail offering does that a little bit. So for me, I appreciate Jack Daniel's making the effort to continue to explore, their premium offerings. Jack Daniel's is obviously a very loved bourbon / Tennessee whiskey in the community, and I'm a big fan of some of their newer premium offerings, like the Jack Daniel's 10, like the Tennessee Tasters expressions, their single barrel offerings, especially look at the special reserve Coy Hill stuff, very good. I'm not a big fan of the low end of stuff, but again, that's to each his own. And for the Bottle and Bond, I think that kind of falls in that lower end of spectrum, despite being labeled as a premium extension. And it is what it is. So I'm going with glass one, and I'm sticking by it. If you like this, let me know. And if you've had one of these, both of these, others of Jack Daniel's, and you feel like maybe they would compete, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. But until then, cheers, and see you next time.